Welcome to Chapter 12, Gilgamesh's Death. 90 years old. First enhanced human. Partnership's founder. The being who proved enhanced humans could govern without dominating. 90 years of choosing equity despite biology making hierarchy easier. All 9 immortals gather at his deathbed. 50,000 years old. Watching a 90-year-old human die proves beings matter more than longevity. Sharur inherits leadership. Enhanced warrior. Second generation. Successor facing the founder's challenge without the founder's charisma. This is the story of how founders' deaths test frameworks, and whether succession survives when personal authority ends. Let's begin. Chapter 12, Gilgamesh's Death. 2833 BCE, 2 years after the Copper Crisis. Gilgamesh's chamber, Uruk dawn. Death felt like mathematics failing. Enhanced cognition that had processed patterns for 174 years couldn't calculate when breathing would stop, when consciousness would end, when the body would finally admit what his mind had recognized years ago, that even enhancement couldn't prevent entropy from claiming what biology temporarily protected. Gilgamesh lay in the chamber where he'd governed Uruk for 50 years since the revelation. The room smelled of incense and medicinal herbs, of the mortality that Thalia's treatments could slow but not prevent, of the human ending that enhancement had delayed but never eliminated. Morning light filtered through reed curtains, illuminating walls that held memories of 10,000 decisions, each one choosing justice over capability when capability would have been easier. His body felt foreign. Breathing required conscious effort, enhancing autonomy once managed automatically. Enhanced cellular repair that had maintained tissue integrity for 17 decades had exhausted its capacity, leaving organs that deteriorated despite their engineered superiority. Muscles that had positioned foundation stones for Uruk's great walls now struggled to lift hands that trembled with entropy's patient victory. Enhanced cognition is still processed, though. That was cruelty or gift depending on perspective, dying mind retaining clarity to understand precisely what was ending, to calculate implications of death that biology made inevitable despite genetic advantages. The processing speed that had enabled governing a complex civilization continued to function as the physical substrate supporting it failed, cell by cell. He calculated mechanically, 174 years old. Enhanced longevity extending lifespan to approximately 3 times baseline maximum, but not preventing death, delaying it. Buying decades of biology otherwise denied, decades spent building institutions that might survive him or might collapse when personal authority that sustained them ended. Maybe hours remaining. Maybe less. Enhanced physiological awareness made dying a detailed experience rather than a gentle fade-out. He felt organs shutting down systematically, kidneys first, then liver, then digestive system, each failure cascading through the biological network that enhanced integration had made more interconnected than baseline physiology. Dying comprehensively because enhanced biology had made everything dependent on everything else. The 6-domain crisis he'd recognized weeks ago remained unresolved. Political consolidation enhanced humans accumulating power through capability advantages institutions couldn't constrain without tyranny. Economic consolidation 73% of bronze trade controlled by enhanced merchants using cognitive advantages that produced information advantages. Military consolidation, Lugal's massacre, proved that processing speed determined combat outcomes. Infrastructure consolidation, Zephyros' systems creating dependency baseline populations, couldn't be overcome. Biological consolidation, lifespan inequality producing experience advantages, no partnership principle could equalize. Resource consolidation copper shortage reveals that scarcity made biological advantages survival advantages. 6 domains where capability determined outcomes despite institutional attempts at equity. 6 tests of whether a partnership could survive when biology made hierarchy natural and equity artificial. 6 questions Gilgamesh wouldn't live to see answered. The door opened quietly, Enkidu's enhanced awareness letting him move without sound despite the substantial frame. His grandson stood silhouetted against corridor light, 45 years old, less than 1/4 of his expected lifespan, every cell vibrating with vitality, as Gilgamesh remembered feeling a century ago. "You're awake, grandfather." Enkidu's voice carried careful control, masking discomfort with witnessing mortality. Enhanced cognition processing death as a transition rather than a tragedy, calculating political implications while missing emotional significance. "Thalia said you wanted to speak with me. Before." He trailed off, unable to articulate what enhanced processing made mathematically sure. Before I die, Gilgamesh completed, voice weaker than enhanced vocal cords should allow. Say it plainly. I'm dying. Enhanced cognition processes that truth. Don't soften it with euphemism. Enkidu entered and sat beside the bed, fluid movement enhanced by biomechanics. I don't know what to say. You've been teaching me governance for 20 years. Preparing me for succession. But I don't know how to say goodbye to a teacher who taught me everything while disagreeing with half of what he taught. Then don't say goodbye, Gilgamesh replied. Say what you're thinking. Enhanced cognition processing what comes after I'm gone. What leadership means. What authority do you inherit? What burden transfers with power? Enkidu's expression shifted recognition that Gilgamesh could still read him despite dying, that enhanced perception operated until final moments, that teacher remained teacher even at death's threshold. I'm thinking that the partnership loses its founder. The institutions you built face the test of whether they survive without the personal authority that sustained them. That I inherit inadequate frameworks you acknowledged were insufficient even while building them. Good, Gilgamesh said, appreciating honesty more than comfort. That's a realistic assessment. Institutions are inadequate. Partnership requires choosing justice over capability daily across every domain where biology makes capability easier than justice. I chose that for 50 years. Built frameworks protecting choice. Hoped frameworks would outlive the founder. Don't know if they will. He gestured for Enkidu to help him sit, enhanced strength supporting enhanced frailty, vitality assisting mortality. The movement brought pain that amplified the nervous system, rather than dulled it, a gift of enhancement, experiencing everything more intensely, including dying. You think I'm passing you leadership, Gilgamesh continued, breathing carefully around words that exhausted diminishing capacity. I'm passing you the burden. Leadership you can claim through capability. Enhanced cognition enables you to govern the complexity of a partnership. But capability isn't authority in partnership. Authority requires consent. Baseline populations consented to your leadership, Enkidu observed. Because I fought consolidation, they feared, Gilgamesh corrected. Because I chose justice over capability when capability would have been easier. Because I built institutions, protecting them despite enhanced advantages suggesting they needed protection, I was protecting them from. They consented because I earned consent through choices that contradicted my interests. He met Enkidu's eyes directly, enhanced to enhanced, founder to successor, dying man to living inheritor. You'll have the capability I had. You'll have the training I provided. You'll have institutions I built. But you won't have consent automatically. Consent requires choosing justice when capability makes injustice easier. Leading people who could refuse to follow. Governing with permission rather than coercion. That's partnership. That's a burden. Not power burden of power constrained by choice. And if capability suggests different governance? Enkidu asked carefully. If enhanced efficiency produces better outcomes? If optimization serves populations better than partnerships' inclusive processes? Then you face the same choice I faced for 50 years, Gilgamesh replied. Choose optimal outcomes through enhanced governance or choose a legitimate process through inclusive partnership. Efficiency or equity. Capability or justice. That's a burden I'm passing you. Choosing a harder path because the alternative is tyranny. Enkidu was silent, processing implications with enhanced cognition that made understanding rapid but acceptance difficult. He recognized the burden without welcoming it, understood teaching without agreeing with its conclusions, and saw patterns without committing to repeating them. I don't know if I'll choose what you chose, Enkidu said finally, honesty that Gilgamesh appreciated despite the disappointment it brought. Enhanced cognition sees the problems that a partnership creates. Inefficiency. Delayed decisions. Baseline limitations constrain enhanced capabilities. I respect what you built. I don't know if I'll maintain it the same way. I know, Gilgamesh acknowledged, voice fading as effort exhausted reserves. That's why institutions are inadequate. They depend on the choices future generations make. Choices I can't determine. Choices that might preserve or abandon what I built. Founders pass the burden without guaranteeing successors will carry it correctly. He lay back, breathing shallow, with enhanced awareness, cataloging each system failure. You'll choose what you choose. Partnership survives or doesn't based on your choices and the choices of your generation. That's the uncertainty founders die with, having done what they could, knowing it wasn't enough, hoping it was sufficient for others to build upon. What do you want me to choose? Enkidu asked quietly. Justice over capability, Gilgamesh replied. Equity over optimization. Partnership over efficiency. Democracy, despite difficulty. But wanting isn't willing. Hoping isn't guaranteeing. Passing the burden isn't forcing a choice. That's what makes it a burden, having responsibility without certainty, having capacity without security, having hope without confidence. Thalia entered, quantum presence announcing herself before physical form materialized. 55,000 years old. Healer who had created enhanced bloodlines and spent 50 years trying to fix what she'd broken. She approached the bed with medical equipment that enhanced cognition, recognized as futile, but that healer's compulsion required her to use anyway. His cellular repair is exhausted, Thalia said to Enkidu, voice clinical masking emotion underneath. Enhanced tissues have exceeded regenerative capacity. Multiple organ failures are cascading. Hours remaining at most. She turned to Gilgamesh, abandoning clinical distance. I'm sorry. I created you to live longer. You're still dying. Everyone dies, Gilgamesh replied with effort. Enhancement bought decades. Decades spent building what might survive me. That's all enhancement could provide, time to work, not immortality to guarantee results. I wanted to save you, Thalia said quietly. You wanted to save humanity, Gilgamesh corrected gently. Created enhancement thinking advantages would help everyone. Instead, the advantages created a hierarchy. That's a pattern you'll repeat unless you learn from it. Enhancement creates problems that enhancement can't solve. Biological advantages produce social consequences. Intervention produces outcomes you can't predict. He gestured for her to sit, conserving strength. I don't blame you for creating me enhanced. I blame circumstances that seem necessary. Cataclysm, you fled. Choices that led here. Entire cascade-producing situation where creating a biological hierarchy seemed like the best available option. But I could have chosen differently, Thalia said. Could have enhanced all humans equally. Could have refused intervention. Could have let humanity develop naturally, even if slower. Could have, Gilgamesh agreed. But didn't. Now living with consequences. Same as everyone, making choices that seem right at the time, learning later they created problems, trying to fix problems while facing new choices, repeating the pattern because perfection is impossible and adequacy is difficult. He looked at both of them, grandson who would lead, immortal who would remain. Partnership isn't a solved problem. It's an ongoing process. Daily choice to choose justice over capability across every domain where capability makes injustice easier. Political domain. Economic domain. Military. Infrastructure. Biological. Resource. Each domain requires conscious choice rather than accepting biological determination. His breathing grew more labored. Enhanced cognition processing that end approached. Each generation chooses. Each person chooses. I chose for 50 years. Now you choose. That's all. Partnership can be continuous choosing rather than permanent achievement. Rest, Thalia said, medical authority overriding emotional conversation. You're exhausting reserves. Reserves are exhausted, Gilgamesh replied with a faint smile. Body is finishing. Mind processes until the end. Enhanced cognition's final gift, awareness of death approaching rather than a gentle fade-out. Dying comprehensively because enhancement made everything interconnected. He closed his eyes to conserve energy. Send word. Immortals should gather. The Partnership Council should prepare. Baseline population should know. The founder is dying. Institutions survive or fail based on choices others make after personal authority ends. Time to discover whether hope was sufficient despite inadequacy. Enkidu and Thalia remained as Gilgamesh's breathing grew shallower, an enhanced human dying from the limits of enhancement. The founder passed without guarantee that the foundation would hold. Builder is leaving walls standing, but is uncertain whether maintenance will continue. Death is approaching like mathematics calculating its own end. And a partnership is facing the test of whether institutions outlive their founders or collapse when the personal authority sustaining them ends. Multiple locations across Uruk. Same day. The news moved through Uruk like water, flowing faster in an enhanced quarter, where communication networks operated at biological efficiency, and more slowly in a baseline quarter, where information passed through social networks rather than cognitive processing. Enhanced quarter, morning. Sharur received word through an enhanced merchant network, quantum communication methods immortals had taught, allowing near-instantaneous information transfer across distances that baseline humans required days to traverse. She processed the message with enhanced cognition, making understanding immediate even while the emotional impact remained uncertain. Gilgamesh dying. Hours remaining. Founder passing. Succession uncertain. She stood in her astronomical observatory, calculating what his death meant for the partnership she'd spent 30 years navigating. 48 years old now. Enhanced cognition provides decades more to process what Gilgamesh's death changed. Respect for the founder who built institutions protecting her rights while constraining her advantages. Appreciation for leadership that had maintained balance she'd found frustrating but functional. Recognition that Enkidu's governance might differ significantly from his grandfather's approach. And underneath, anticipation that enhanced cognitive processing made difficult to suppress. Gilgamesh had constrained enhanced consolidation through personal authority and moral suasion. His death removed the primary voice opposing enhanced advantages determining outcomes. Enkidu might govern differently. Might recognize that capability should determine authority. Might implement efficient systems rather than inclusive processes. She didn't celebrate the founder's death. But enhanced cognition processed the opportunities his absence created. That was biological reality. Superior information processing meant seeing patterns baseline humans missed. Calculating implications baseline cognition required longer to grasp, recognizing opportunities while others remained shocked by loss. The partnership's test was beginning. Enhanced humans would determine whether institutions would survive without the founder's authority. Whether constitutional protections prevented consolidation or whether biology determined outcomes despite frameworks attempting to constrain it. Sharur returned to her calculations, stellar movements that continued regardless of human mortality, mathematical certainties that contrasted with social uncertainties that Gilgamesh's death produced. She would mourn the founder respectfully. Would attend the funeral appropriately. Would participate in succession discussions constructively. And would support Enkidu's leadership when his governance recognized that capability advantages should determine authority despite partnership principles suggesting otherwise. Enhanced cognition processing opportunity while respecting the founder. Both are true simultaneously. That was a complex partnership that required enhanced humans to navigate honoring the past while calculating the future, mourning loss while anticipating change, respecting the founder while preparing to modify what he built. Gilgamesh was dying. Partnership was testing. Enhanced humans were positioned to shape what came next. Biology would determine whether institutions survived or biological advantages overcame constitutional constraints. Baseline quarter, late morning. Sharur learned of Gilgamesh's deteriorating condition from a messenger who traveled from the enhanced quarter, bringing news that the enhanced communication networks had processed hours earlier. The delay itself demonstrated information inequality that characterized the partnership's practical reality despite institutional equality. 63 years old. Baseline humans approach life expectancy limits while enhanced peers remain vital. Sharur felt his body's mortality more acutely, knowing Gilgamesh, an enhanced human who should have lived another century, was dying from cellular exhaustion that baseline physiology couldn't comprehend. He sat in the partnership council chamber, processing the implications with dread, as if the enhanced cognition would have calculated them instantly. Still, the baseline processing required emotional work to accept. Gilgamesh's dying meant the protector's dying. Founder dying. The voice that had constrained enhanced consolidation for 50 years fell silent. The partnership had survived enhanced advantages because Gilgamesh fought consolidation personally. Constitutional frameworks existed because he built them. Baseline protections functioned because his authority enforced them. Enhanced humans chose partnership partly because the founder they respected advocated for it. Now the advocate was dying. Authority ending. Enforcement is becoming uncertain. Would constitutional protection survive without personal authority that had sustained them? Would enhanced humans choose partnership when the founders' moral suasion no longer constrained their advantages? Would institutions prove adequate to guarantee their own survival, or would they require continuous personal enforcement that ended with the founders' death? Sharur didn't know. Enhanced cognition would have calculated probabilities. Baseline intuition could only fear possibilities. He thought about the weighted voting debate, Gilgamesh's last intervention preventing constitutional change that would have formalized enhanced authority based on capability. 5-vote margin. Decisive intervention spending remaining political capital. Temporary victory that baseline population celebrated while recognizing its temporary nature. The enhanced coalition had waited for Gilgamesh to die before trying again. The founder was dying. What prevented enhanced humans from proposing weighted voting again? What stopped the capability-based authority once the founder's opposition was removed? What protected baseline populations without the protector's active defense? Constitutional frameworks existed. But frameworks required interpretation, required enforcement, required choosing to maintain them despite biological pressures toward consolidation. Gilgamesh had provided that choice through personal commitment. Whether institutions survived without personal authority remained uncertain. Sharur called an emergency partnership council session to address succession. Baseline representatives needed to establish institutional governance before the enhanced coalition claimed leadership through Enkidu's capability-based authority. Partnership couldn't become personal succession, that contradicted the constitutional principles Gilgamesh had established. But the emergency session felt inadequate. Felt like baseline defense scrambling while enhanced leadership was anticipated. Felt like playing politics while the founder died. Felt like proving exactly what Gilgamesh had feared, that institutions were inadequate without continuous choosing to maintain them. Sharur stood slowly, feeling 63 years of baseline mortality in joints that ached and a spine that bent. He would organize a council session. Would argue for institutional governance over personal succession. Would fight to preserve what Gilgamesh built. But he would do it knowing that baseline humans were losing a protector whose death exposed vulnerability, and that consolidation would exploit it. Partnership was being tested. The founder couldn't help. Institutions faced a reality check, they might not survive. And the baseline populations watched the protector die, hoping that constitutional frameworks would prove adequate without the founder's enforcement. Hybrid quarter, midday. Saduri heard about Gilgamesh's condition from both enhanced networks and baseline messengers, hybrid existence meaning she received information from multiple sources at different speeds, processed it through mixed cognition that was neither baseline slow nor enhanced fast, and felt emotions that belonged to populations who claimed her partially but never completely. 52 years old now. Enhanced baseline hybrid. Daughter of Sophia. Sister to enhanced and baseline humans who didn't quite know what to do with someone who belonged nowhere exclusively. She sat in her mediation office where she'd spent 30 years helping hybrids navigate identity, neither population fully understood, processing news that the father figure was dying, feeling loss that was personal and political simultaneously. Gilgamesh had been the only enhanced human who acknowledged hybrid exclusion while building inclusive institutions anyway. Who recognized that the partnership between enhanced and baseline didn't automatically include hybrids caught in the middle. Who validated hybrid existence while admitting he couldn't solve problems his existence represented. She remembered a conversation from years ago, shortly after her fertility diagnosis. Gilgamesh sitting with her, enhanced cognition processing hybrid biology with understanding that came from recognizing enhancement created exclusions it couldn't fix. "You're not the bridge that failed," he'd said quietly. "Your bridge, we haven't finished building." Partnership between enhanced and baseline doesn't automatically create space for hybrids. We have to intentionally build that space. And I haven't built well enough yet. That acknowledgement had meant everything. Not solution acknowledgement. Not fix recognition. Not dismissal, validation that hybrid exclusion was a real problem requiring a real response rather than optimistic hope that partnership would naturally include everyone. Now Gilgamesh was dying. The bridge builder is leaving the bridge incomplete. Hybrid advocate falling silent. A person who'd validated her existence when others saw only a problem passing before finishing work he'd started. Siduri felt personal grief, losing someone who'd seen her when others looked through her. In political, losing a voice that spoke for populations neither side claimed fully. In existential, losing person who'd understood that belonging nowhere was its own kind of belonging, requiring recognition rather than resolution. She thought about a hybrid summit that would come, hybrids gathering to question whether the mediation role between enhanced and baseline served hybrid interests or just a convenient fiction allowing the partnership to avoid addressing hybrid exclusion directly. Questions she'd been asking. Questions Gilgamesh had acknowledged without answering. Questions that remained after the founder's death were problems he'd recognized that hadn't been solved. Hybrids would have to finish the bridge themselves. Building a space partnership hadn't been created automatically. Validate their own existence without an advocate speaking for them. That was the burden Gilgamesh passed to them through incompletion rather than achievement, acknowledging problem without solving it, recognizing exclusion without fixing it, trusting that hybrids themselves would build what partnership hadn't provided. Siduri stood, looking out the window at Uruk, divided into enhanced quarter, baseline quarter, and hybrid quarter, existing between but belonging to neither. Physical geography reflecting social reality. A hybrid space was built because the partnership didn't naturally include it. She would mourn Gilgamesh. Would attend the funeral. Would say goodbye to the person who'd seen her when others didn't. And would commit to finishing work he'd started, building a hybrid space within a partnership that hadn't created it automatically, validating a hybrid existence that the partnership hadn't recognized fully, creating belonging for populations who belonged nowhere according to the categories the partnership used. The bridge builder was dying. The bridge remained incomplete. Hybrids would finish what the founder began. That was legacy Gilgamesh passed them: incomplete work requiring completion, recognized exclusion requiring remedy, validated existence requiring continued validation. Father figure dying. Advocate ending. But the truth he'd spoken surviving: that hybrids mattered, that exclusion was absolute, that partnership required building space for everyone, including those who belonged nowhere according to existing categories. Siduri would carry that truth forward. Would speak it when the founder's voice was silenced. Would build what he'd acknowledged as a partnership that needed to be completed. Grief and determination combined. Loss and commitment merged. Personal sorrow and political purpose unified. Gilgamesh's death meant the hybrids had to complete the bridge themselves. Time to discover whether they could finish what the founder began. Partnership Council Chamber, afternoon. The emergency session convened with unusual speed, enhanced administrators organizing logistics while baseline representatives scrambled to participate in a discussion that would determine succession. The chamber was filled with partnership council members representing enhanced, baseline, and hybrid populations who mediated between. Ninurta spoke first, enhanced representative, 67 years old by calendar but physically vigorous, another century of life ahead while Gilgamesh died from cellular exhaustion. Founder is dying, hours remaining. We must address succession before an authority vacuum creates instability. Partnership needs continuity. Enkidu is designated successor. Enhanced cognition enables the governing partnership's complexity. Transition should be immediate upon Gilgamesh's death. Partnership constitution prevents hereditary succession, Sharur countered immediately. Gilgamesh governed with partnership consent, not through designation. Authority requires consent from the governed. Enkidu's capability doesn't automatically grant leadership. Partnership Council governs collectively until the formal selection process is completed. Collective governance during crisis creates inefficiency that a partnership can't afford, Ninurta replied. Enhanced cognition enables rapid decision-making. Baseline collective processes require time, but a crisis doesn't provide it. Enkidu should assume leadership immediately, with the Partnership Council providing guidance. Guidance from the Council Enkidu will ignore based on enhanced judgment, Sharur said. That's not partnership. That's enhanced autocracy with an advisory council providing a fiction of consultation. Constitutional principles require consent-based governance, not capability-based succession. The debate revealed fault lines that had existed since the revelation, but Gilgamesh's presence had prevented them from fracturing the partnership altogether, enhancing the coalition arguing for capable leadership. Baseline defense insists on institutional governance, constitutional principles contradicting practical efficiency. The partnership tested before the founder's death made the test inevitable. Thalia materialized at the chamber periphery, quantum presence made physical to deliver the medical update that the political debate required. Gilgamesh has hours remaining. Cellular failure cascading. Enhanced tissues exhausted. He's lucid but weakening. If the Partnership Council wishes to consult the founder before death, do so now. Opportunity ends soon. The chamber quieted, political calculation confronting human mortality. The succession debate paused to recognize that the person they were discussing replacing remained alive but barely. That founder they'd relied upon for 50 years was dying while they argued about what came after. We should present a unified position to Gilgamesh, suggested Mira, a hybrid representative attempting mediation. Enhanced perspective. Baseline perspective. Hybrid perspective. Let the founder advise on succession before death removes his guidance. We don't have a unified position, Sharur observed. We have a fundamental disagreement about whether authority transfers through capability or consent. Pretending unity doesn't create it. Then present disagreement, Thalia said quietly. Let the founder witness the partnership he built, facing the test he predicted. Let him see institutions proving inadequate exactly as he warned. That's an honest farewell, showing him truth rather than comforting fiction. The council members absorbed implications. Gilgamesh had built institutions he'd acknowledged were inadequate. Had warned they required continuous choosing to maintain. Had predicted they'd face exactly this test when he died. Now facing that test hours before his death, while he could still observe. The founder was dying, watching the failure he'd predicted. That was tragedy or honesty, depending on perspective. Inadequacy was visible before the builder's death. Legacy uncertain while the creator remained conscious. We'll consult Gilgamesh collectively, Ninurta decided, enhancing efficiency in the choosing process despite disagreement about the outcome. Present our positions honestly. Let the founder advise, despite knowing the advice won't resolve the disagreement. That's respect for the builder even when building proves insufficient. The council adjourned to travel to Gilgamesh's chamber. Enhanced representatives, baseline representatives, and hybrid mediators are all preparing to consult the founder about succession, while the founder is dying, watching the partnership test institutions that his death would trigger. Politics and mortality merged. Succession debate and personal loss combined. Institutional crisis and human grief are unified. Gilgamesh was dying. Partnership was fracturing. Institutions were testing. All happening simultaneously, while the founder remained conscious enough to witness exactly what he'd predicted 50 years ago when establishing partnership structures he knew were inadequate. Legacy is being tested before death ends. Failure was visible before the builder passed. Hope was uncertain before consciousness ceased. That was the founder's burden, dying while watching institutions prove inadequate, building while recognizing insufficiency, hoping while expecting uncertainty. Partnership Council headed to the deathbed to consult the dying founder about the survival of what he'd built. Time to discover whether consultation mattered or whether biology determined outcomes despite the founder's final guidance. 2833 BCE, Gilgamesh's chamber. Evening. The chamber filled slowly as evening shadows lengthened across Uruk. Enhanced representatives arrived first, biological efficiency translating to logistical speed, cognitive processing enabling rapid response to summons. Baseline representatives followed with a respectful delay, demonstrating information inequality even in grief. Hybrid mediators positioned themselves between populations as they always did, belonging nowhere completely while connecting everyone partially. And the immortals came, 9 quantum presences manifesting physically in a gathering that occurred rarely enough to mark significance. Enkidu stood at the chamber's threshold, uncertain whether to position himself with enhanced humans whose biology he shared or at Gilgamesh's bedside as designated successor. Enhanced cognition processed social calculations rapidly. Proximity to the dying founder signaled a claim to authority, but distance demonstrated humility that might win baseline support. Standing in the doorway solved nothing, and I felt inadequate in either direction. Come closer, Gilgamesh said, voice still carrying authority despite the body's failure. Successor belongs at the founder's side regardless of where the heart resides. Enkidu approached the bed, acutely aware of everyone watching, calculation he'd tried hiding through hesitation. That was the enhanced human's problem in microcosm, cognitive processing so rapid that baseline observers detected overthinking before enhanced could complete a thought. Sharur entered with a delegation of baseline council members, moving with dignity that age and experience conferred despite biological disadvantages. 71 years old now, his body shows where that enhanced humans his age wouldn't experience for another century. But a sharp mind, accumulated wisdom, and decades of political skill made him Gilgamesh's equal in governance if not biology. "Old friend," Sharur said, voice rough with emotion inadequately concealed. "We gathered as you requested. Thank you for coming despite knowing what this gathering means." Gilgamesh's enhanced vision tracked everyone present, even as body systems continued to fail systematically. "Summoning you to witness death feels like passing a burden without permission. But partnership requires witnessing even uncomfortable transitions." Saduri stood between enhanced and baseline representatives as she always did, hybrid biology positioning her physically where her identity placed her psychologically. 46 years old, enhanced enough to live longer than baseline humans but not long enough to match enhanced longevity. Cognitive processing is superior to baseline humans by perhaps 40%, inferior to enhanced humans by a similar margin. Perpetually in the middle. Perpetually adequate to neither. "You're not a burden," Saduri said quietly. "You're teacher. We came to learn the final lesson." "I hope so." Gilgamesh's breathing became shallower. Though worried, the final lesson is founders don't know how to prevent failure despite decades of trying. The 9 immortals arranged themselves around the chamber's perimeter, quantum presences taking physical form in a configuration that demonstrated both unity and division. Chronos stood nearest the enhanced representatives, positioning signaling where authority preference resided. Sophia positioned herself between populations as a teacher to all. Erebus stood alone in the corner, isolation reflecting decades of opposition, vindicated by the current crisis. Nyx stood beside Chronos, but not touching him, physical proximity masking emotional distance that had grown since her probability calculation showed consolidation approaching inevitability. 50,000 years together. 15 years ago, inseparable. Now, standing near each other while growing apart through a crisis neither could prevent. Prometheus stood near the doorway, a gift-giver immortal who taught iron metallurgy against the Council's prohibition, positioning himself for a quick exit if the reaction turned hostile. That was the teacher's eternal fear, being blamed for students using lessons poorly, despite lessons themselves being morally neutral. Thalia remained at the bedside, the healer who'd created the enhancement that made Gilgamesh possible, now monitoring his death with medical precision that felt like a documentation of failure. Watching enhanced cells exhaust repair capacity, she'd designed. Observing organ systems shut down according to patterns she'd studied. Recording death, she couldn't prevent it despite knowing every biological process involved. Zephyros stood near the window, an immortal builder, uncomfortable in spaces he hadn't designed. The architecture of the sick room followed the function bed, medical equipment, gathering space without beauty or optimization that made buildings meaningful. But the death room required function over form. Even architects acknowledged that. Korrath stood with the military delegation, a warrior immortal who taught combat techniques, now watching a student die from biology rather than battle. That contradiction felt symbolic somehow, warriors preparing others for violent death, while peaceful death from age caught everyone unprepared. Lyra entered last, pushing through the crowd with a teenager's awkward determination. 15 years old now, Gilgamesh's hybrid daughter, who'd spent her life watching her father lead the partnership while barely knowing her personally. Enhanced cognition processing approach with social anxiety that cognitive ability couldn't eliminate. "Father," she said, voice breaking on the word she'd used rarely enough that speaking it felt like claiming a relationship she hadn't earned. "Lyra." Gilgamesh's expression softened with recognition that combined love and regret. "Thank you for coming. I know we barely." He stopped, conserving breath for essential communication. "I'm sorry. For absence. For inadequacy. For being a founder who could barely father. You built a partnership." Lyra moved to the bedside, taking his hand despite the relationship's fragility. "That's legacy enough." "I built a foundation." Gilgamesh looked at everyone gathered, enhanced, baseline, hybrid, immortal populations assembled through choice, despite biology suggesting separation. "Your generation has to live in the house. Has to maintain, repair, and improve it. Has to make it home instead of a historical monument. He gestured weakly to Enkidu. Successor ring. In the box beside the bed. Enkidu retrieved the ring, bronze circle inscribed with partnership symbols, worn by Uruk's leader for 50 years as badge of authority and burden, simple object carrying weight beyond material composition. Don't want to take it, Enkidu said quietly, honesty replacing calculation. Not ready. Not worthy. Not certain, I believe in what it represents. Good. Gilgamesh's voice carried approval despite words suggesting criticism. Uncertainty means you're thinking instead of assuming. That's a better foundation than confidence in the wrong direction. Gilgamesh looked around the chamber at all the populations gathered, enhanced cognition cataloging faces even as neural connections began to fragment. Called you here for witnessing, he said, voice growing weaker but maintaining clarity. Not because dying words carry special wisdom, mortality doesn't confer insight absent during life. But a partnership requires shared experience. Can't build together without being present together. Can't maintain institutions without remembering why founders built them. He paused, breathing shallowly and rapidly. Thalia adjusted the equipment, monitoring vitals, each readout showing a further decline. I'm dying with the 6-domain crisis unresolved, Gilgamesh continued. Political consolidation approaching. Economic dominance is entrenched. Military hierarchy established. Infrastructure segregation built. Biological inequality is permanent. Resource scarcity is emerging. Partnership holding but strained. Institutions are inadequate but functioning. Future uncertain but possible. Enhanced representatives shifted uncomfortably. That was the founder's final message? Incomplete work and uncertain prospects? Wanted to die having solved everything, Gilgamesh said, reading the room's reaction despite the body's failure. Wanted to pass a successor a completed system with clear instructions. Wanted certainty. But politics doesn't offer certainty. Partnership doesn't provide guarantees. Justice doesn't promise victory. He looked specifically at Enkidu. You'll face a crisis I can't predict. We'll feel inadequate. We'll question whether the partnership is worth maintaining. We'll see enhanced humans dominating through biological advantages that seem natural rather than historical. We'll watch baseline humans struggle despite institutional protections. We'll be tempted to abandon equity for efficiency because efficiency feels right when you're an enhanced human calculating optimization. Enkidu nodded, unable to speak through recognition's weight. When that happens, Gilgamesh continued, remember, biology doesn't negotiate with ethics. But ethics determine whether biology becomes destiny or a challenge. Enhanced humans will always have advantages. Partnership's purpose isn't eliminating advantages, it's building a system where advantages don't determine worth, power doesn't justify itself through capability, and justice matters more than optimization. He turned toward baseline representatives, Sharur's weathered face representing generations who trusted partnership despite inequality. You'll be tempted to accept subordination, Gilgamesh said. Will seem logical enhanced humans are more capable. It will feel inevitable that biology determines outcomes. It will appear fair that merit deserves reward. Don't accept it. Capability doesn't determine worth. Optimization isn't wisdom. Efficiency isn't justice. Baseline humans brought wisdom partnership needed. Brought a perspective that enhanced what humans couldn't access. Brought humanity that pure capability missed. Sharur's eyes glistened with tears inadequately suppressed. 71 years of partnership, watching the founder who'd made equity possible now dying with the mission incomplete. Partnership wasn't gift-enhanced, humans gave baseline humans, Gilgamesh said, voice strengthening briefly with conviction's force. Was choice all humans made together. Enhanced humans chose sharing over dominating. Baseline humans chose participating over submitting. Hybrids chose bridging over picking sides. That choice, that continuous, conscious, difficult choice, is the partnership's foundation. He looked at Saduri, a hybrid daughter of Sophia, standing between populations as she always did. You'll be tired, Gilgamesh said gently. Bridges are tired. Mediators are exhausted. Living between populations without belonging anywhere takes a toll. I barely understood, despite watching hybrids struggle. You'll be tempted to choose a side. To be enhanced or baseline instead of perpetually between. Don't. Partnership needs bridges even when bridges feel like a burden. Needs mediators even when mediation feels like thankless work. Needs people who understand both populations because they belong to neither completely. Siduri nodded, tears flowing freely down her face, which showed both populations' genetic heritage mixing imperfectly into something new. Then Gilgamesh turned toward the immortals, 9 quantum refugees who'd created this entire crisis through well-intentioned intervention spanning millennia. You'll blame yourselves, he said, looking specifically at Thalia. We'll see current crisis as validation of Erebus's warnings. We'll question whether hiding was the right choice, whether enhancement was ethical, and whether revelation was premature. Stop. You were refugees who saved humanity from extinction. Yes, you manipulated us. Yes, you caused harm. Yes, you created inequality. But you also prevented catastrophes we'll never know about because you succeeded. Erebus made a slight sound, not disagreement, but acknowledgement of complexity that vindication carried. Crisis was inevitable, Gilgamesh continued. Enhancement created capability inequality. Capability inequality generated political pressure. Political pressure tested whether institutions could survive biology's reality. That testing was always coming. The question wasn't whether a crisis would occur, but whether humans would have institutional tools for navigating a crisis when it arrived. He looked at all 9 immortals simultaneously, enhanced visual processing maintaining multiple focal points despite the body's systematic failure. You gave us those tools, Gilgamesh said. Gave us time. Gave us knowledge. Gave us an example, however flawed, of beings cooperating across vast differences. Gave us a foundation for building something better. Whether we use those gifts well remains uncertain. But having them is better than facing a crisis without preparation. Chronos made a small gesture, hand rising slightly before falling, acknowledgement without full acceptance. I built inadequate institutions, Gilgamesh said, voice weakening again as energy reserves depleted. Built protections are insufficient for guaranteeing the partnership's survival. Built frameworks that hold under pressure without preventing pressure's accumulation. Built a foundation without knowing whether the structure built atop it would stand. He looked at everyone gathered, populations assembled through shared history despite biology suggesting separation. That's the founder's burden, he said quietly. Building while knowing building is inadequate. Establishing while recognizing establishment doesn't guarantee continuation. Passing authority while hoping successors choose to maintain what the founders couldn't perfect. His breathing became even more labored. Thalia's equipment registered failing vitals, cardiac function declining, oxygen saturation dropping, neural activity fragmenting. Partnership continues, Gilgamesh whispered. Consolidation continues. Choice continues. I've made mine, built institutions. Established protections. Died hoping they were sufficient despite knowing inadequacy. Now you make yours. He managed a weak smile despite pain and exhaustion. Make better choices than I did, he said, words barely audible. Improve inadequate institutions. Strengthen insufficient protections. Build what I couldn't. That's how founders' work continues through successors building beyond founders' limitations. His eyes closed. His breathing slowed. His enhanced cognition began to shut down as neural connections were systematically severed. Thank you, Gilgamesh whispered, final words carrying gratitude for presence rather than achievement. For being here. For witnessing. For choosing to gather despite differences. That's partnership, choosing to be present despite biology suggesting separation. If you can choose that while I'm dying, maybe you can choose it after I'm dead. Death came slowly, then suddenly. Gilgamesh's breathing grew shallower across hours that felt like days to those watching. Enhanced cognition processing death approaching meant he remained aware longer than baseline humans would have, experiencing dying as a detailed process rather than a gentle fade-out. Each system failure is registered clearly. Each organ shutdown felt distinctly, each neural connection severing perceived individually. That was enhancement's final gift and final curse, dying comprehensively while knowing precisely what was ending. Thalia monitored vital signs with medical equipment that made death's approach mathematically sure. Enhanced cellular repair, exhausted. Kidney function, ceased. Liver metabolism, stopped. Digestive processing, ended. Cardiovascular system, failing. Neural activity, fragmenting. Each measurement confirming what enhanced physiology made apparent. Gilgamesh was dying despite enhancement, because of enhancement, through enhancement that had bought decades but couldn't prevent entropy's victory. Minutes remaining, Thalia said quietly, clinical assessment masking emotional weight underneath. Enkidu moved closer to the bedside, uncertain whether to speak or remain silent. What did the successor say to the founder during the final moments? Thank you for the burden. Sorry for the inadequacy. Promised to maintain inadequate institutions despite doubts about their value? He said nothing. Sometimes silence was honesty that words couldn't improve. Sharur stood beside Enkidu despite their differences, the baseline elder and the enhanced successor united by a shared connection to the dying leader. That positioning, enhanced and baseline standing together at deathbed, represented partnership in a microcosm. Biology suggested separation. Choice enabled presence. Institutions facilitated gathering. Human decision determined the outcome. Suduri held Gilgamesh's hand, a hybrid daughter offering physical contact in the final moments that fatherhood hadn't earned during life. But death erased debt. Mortality forgave inadequacy. The dying deserved presence regardless of the relationship's history. Lyra stood on Gilgamesh's other side, a 15-year-old daughter whose relationship with her father had been primarily political rather than personal. Enhanced cognition processing father's death while wrestling with emotions, cognitive ability couldn't eliminate grief for a relationship never fully developed, loss of future possibilities, recognition that death ended chances for connection they'd never properly built. The immortals watched from the chamber's perimeter, 9 quantum beings who'd lived 50,000 years observing human dying with a mixture of scientific curiosity and emotional engagement. They'd watched countless humans die across millennia. Enhanced humans like Gilgamesh lived longer, but still died. That impermanence remained a fundamental difference between the immortal and the mortal, regardless of the enhancement's effects. But this death felt different. Gilgamesh wasn't merely an enhanced human dying, he was a founder dying, a leader dying, a symbol dying. His death marked a transition point. His mortality tested whether institutions could outlive the man who built them. Gilgamesh's breathing stopped. Then, it resumed briefly. Then stopped again. His enhanced physiology fought death through instincts that couldn't prevent it but could delay it. The cardiovascular system is attempting to maintain circulation despite the failure of the organs. Neural pathways are trying to fire despite severed connections. Cellular processes continued through momentum even as coordinating intelligence dissolved. Final breath came so quietly that several people missed its significance, just a slight exhale that didn't resume, cessation that felt like a pause before the body's stillness confirmed permanence. Thalia checked monitors, verifying what everyone knew: no heartbeat, no respiration, no neural activity. Enhanced human who'd lived 172 years, built a partnership, led Uruk, passed the burden to an uncertain successor, and died hoping inadequate institutions would prove sufficient foundation for building better. He's gone, Thalia said, voice professional despite personal devastation underneath. The chamber fell silent except for quiet sounds of grieving, Lyra crying, Suduri weeping, Sharur's shuddering breath, Enkidu's suppressed sob, baseline representatives' collective mourning, enhanced humans' controlled emotion inadequately hidden, hybrids' tears flowing freely, immortals' ancient sorrow for mortal loss they'd witnessed countless times without developing immunity. Gilgamesh was dead. The partnership's founder had died. The institutions he'd built now faced testing without his authority to stabilize them. The burden he'd carried alone was now distributed across populations, uncertain they could collectively bear its weight. The hope he'd maintained despite recognizing inadequacy now transferred to humans who questioned whether hope justified effort. Outside the chamber, word spread through Uruk with speed that demonstrated information's fluid transmission across populations despite institutional barriers. Gilgamesh was dead. The founder had died. The partnership's builder had passed. The enhanced human's ideal leader had gone. Baseline human's protector had ceased. The hybrid bridge had ended. What happened next would reveal whether institutions outlived founders or died with them. Order safe house, beneath Uruk temple moments after Gilgamesh's death. The quantum communication pulse reached Methuselah 300 meters beneath the city, traveling through crystalline matrices that transformed electromagnetic signals into encoded light faster than any messenger could run. A single encoded burst containing 3 words that changed everything. The founder sleeps. Methuselah stood in the command center his father had designed, same chamber where he coordinated order response to prophetic decoding, same display showing 12-cell networks across 3 continents, same quantum dampening fields that made the room invisible to Bronze Age detection technology or immortal scanning. But this notification was different. This wasn't about enhanced humans discovering intervention patterns, baseline scholars questioning origins, or hybrid populations seeking independence. This was the death of the partnership's architect. The passing of the first enhanced human who'd chosen equity over efficiency, despite biological advantages that made hierarchy logical. The founder who'd proven that partnership could work through conscious choice rather than biological determinism. Dead at 172 years, despite enhancement extending lifespan, despite cellular repair mechanisms his body inherited, despite genetic advantages that delayed but couldn't prevent entropy's victory. Methuselah was 217 years old. Had led the Order for 15 years since his father Enoch's death. Had witnessed 37 Order members die in service to the Covenant, Kata killed in Lugal's massacre, others dead from age or accident or sacrifice. Had encoded their final reports, preserved their documentation, and honored their service. But none had carried the weight of this moment. None had marked a transition point this fundamental. The partnership's founder was dead. Order's purpose, preserving truth for revelation that would judge immortal intervention, now faced its first test, whether institutions outlived personalities, whether documentation served purposes that transcended individual lives, whether Covenant preserved truth when the founders who established it had died. Inara materialized through a quantum doorway, expression carrying recognition that pivotal moments required immediate presence. You received notification? 3 minutes ago. Methuselah gestured to displays showing Order member positions across Uruk. Damon, embedded in the council chamber, witnessed death personally. Awan monitoring enhanced quarter reactions. Kamana tracking baseline community response. 7 members strategically positioned to document the succession crisis that the founder's death will trigger immediately. Do we reveal ourselves? Inara asked a question that every Order member wrestled with when witnessing moments that intervention might prevent. Gilgamesh trusted us. Knew the Order existed, even if he never learned that we documented his leadership. Could we have? Should we have told him? Let him know that someone preserved the truth he built a partnership protecting. Telling him reveals Order to populations not ready for revelation. Methuselah pulled up probability matrices showing cascade scenarios. Gilgamesh dies knowing he built inadequate institutions. Revealing Order introduces a variable he can't control, a hidden organization documenting everything for judgment he won't witness. That knowledge might have helped or hurt. We'll never know because the Covenant requires secrecy until revelation readiness emerges. He began encoding death notification for permanent preservation, each symbol carrying the weight of a moment that would define the partnership's survival or collapse. Order exists for moments like this, Methuselah said, voice carrying the burden of leadership that his father had passed 15 years prior. When founders die, personalities end, authorities transition, and institutions face testing without a stabilizing presence. That's when documentation matters most, when living memory fails, when political disputes erase accurate history, when populations rewrite past serving present rather than preserving truth. Awan entered carrying encrypted reports from embedded observers. Enhanced quarter response is calculating the succession advantage. The baseline quarter is grieving a genuine loss while recognizing that the protector has died. Hybrid communities are uncertain. Siduri present at deathbed, witness final moments, reported testament calling bridges tired but necessary. The Partnership Council will meet tomorrow for succession confirmation. Enkidu inheriting? Inara asked. Designated successor, 45 years old, enhanced cognition enabling rapid governance, but uncertain whether partnership is worth maintaining. Awan transmitted a detailed psychological profile. He'll question institutions while serving within them. He'll propose consolidation while maintaining equity frameworks. He'll test whether the founder's inadequate structures survive the founder's death. Methuselah absorbed information with enhanced pattern recognition processing across multiple timescales. Immediate succession crisis. Medium-term consolidation pressure. Long-term revelation approach. And underlying everything, did the partnership's first founder succeed in building institutions that transcended his personal authority? Assemble everyone, Methuselah said. Full order mobilization. This is why Father built an organization, to preserve truth when founders die, when institutions are tested, when populations choose whether to maintain equity or accept hierarchy. We witness. We document. We prepare future generations for understanding moments when partnerships survived or collapsed based on the choices humans made after the founders' guidance ended. Order chamber, full assembly. 1 hour after death. 23 Order members gathered in a quantum-stabilized chamber, the largest assembly since Enoch's funeral 15 years prior. Enhanced humans, baseline humans, and hybrids united through a covenant transcending biological divisions. Hidden witnesses serving purposes most humans wouldn't understand, and immortals didn't fully know. Methuselah stood before the assembled covenant servants, expression carrying the weight of documenting the moment that would define the revelation's context. Gilgamesh has died. Partnership's founder. An enhanced human who chose equity despite biological advantages, enabling hierarchy. A leader who built inadequate institutions while honestly admitting inadequacy. Human whose death tests whether conscious choice can outlive the chooser. He activated the central display showing Gilgamesh's final moments, Damon's embedded observation providing complete documentation of testament, death, and immediate succession crisis. Father built order knowing founders would die before revelation, Methuselah continued. Knowing personalities are temporary, but truth requires preservation across generations. Knowing that future humans judging immortal intervention would need evidence showing what founders attempted, what institutions enabled, what choices humans made when partnership was tested. The display showed Gilgamesh's final words, make a better choice than I did. Improve inadequate institutions. Strengthen insufficient protections. Build what I couldn't. That's what we document, Methuselah said. Not just death, transition. Not just ending, testing. Not just the founders passing, institution survival without the founders' authority stabilizing them. We preserve the complete truth, showing whether the partnership was a sustainable governance or a temporary arrangement maintained only through personal charisma that died with the charismatic leader. Damon stood, an embedded observer who'd witnessed death directly. 38 years old, a former questioner who'd challenged the immortal secrecy before joining the order, serving revelation preparation. Enhanced cognition, carrying guilt that superior processing had enabled questioning, while baseline humans trusted without analytical capacity, questioning was required. I was there, Damon said, voice carrying the weight of a witness bearing testimony that most order members couldn't provide personally. Hidden among baseline council delegation, documentation equipment concealed as a ceremonial tablet, quantum recording active throughout the final hours. Gilgamesh never knew I was order, never knew that someone in the chamber was preserving every word for revelation judgment 1200 years hence. He pulled up a complete sensory recording, not just audio and visual but emotional resonance captured through quantum field analysis, temperature fluctuations showing grief patterns, acoustic signatures revealing who wept openly versus who suppressed mourning. Gilgamesh knew he was dying, Damon reported, playing back the final testament. Enhanced cognition processing each system failure comprehensively, kidneys ceasing, liver stopping, heart weakening, neural connections severing one by one. He felt everything. Understood everything. Remained conscious through the death process that baseline humans experience as a gentle fade-out. That was enhancement's final curse, dying with full awareness of dying, processing mortality comprehensively while baseline humans received the mercy of unconsciousness. But he used that awareness deliberately. Used extended dying together populations, to force them to witness together, to demonstrate that choosing presence despite biology suggesting separation was the partnership's foundation. The recording showed Gilgamesh's chamber filling, enhanced arrivals first through biological efficiency, baseline arrivals second through choice, hybrids positioning between, as always, immortals manifesting last in acknowledgement that mortal death was a moment belonging primarily to mortals. Watch his eyes, Damon said, focusing the recording on Gilgamesh's enhanced visual processing. He's tracking everyone simultaneously. Recording faces. calculating attendance patterns. Even dying, he's documenting, noting who came immediately versus who delayed, which populations positioned near deathbed versus which maintained distance, how biological advantages shaped even grief's expression. The recording captured Gilgamesh's final words to each population. Enhanced warned against efficiency without justice. Baseline encouraged to resist subordination despite capability differences. Hybrids told that bridges matter despite exhaustion. Immortals released from guilt while acknowledging intervention's consequences. His testament wasn't generic dying wisdom, Damon said. Was specific instruction tailored to each population's struggles. He used the final hours teaching the final lesson, that inadequate institutions require conscious maintenance, that partnership is an ongoing choice rather than an achieved state, that biology doesn't determine worth even when biology determines capability. Damon transmitted an emotional analysis showing grief patterns across populations, enhanced humans controlling mourning through cognitive regulation, baseline humans weeping openly with cultural permission for emotional expression, hybrids displaying grief somewhere between the two, immortals standing silent with ancient sorrow they'd felt countless times without developing immunity. His final words acknowledged inadequacy without despair. Damon continued. Admitted institutions are insufficient without abandoning hope that insufficiency could be improved. Pass the burden to an uncertain successor while trusting uncertainty meant thinking rather than assuming. He died the way he governed, honestly confronting reality while maintaining hope despite recognizing hope's fragility. The recording showed the final breath, so quiet that several people missed significance, just a slight exhale that didn't resume, cessation that felt like a pause before the body's stillness confirmed permanence. That's what we preserve, Damon said. Not a sanitized memorial but an honest death. Not a heroic founder myth but a flawed human who built inadequate institutions while admitting inadequacy. No certainty about the partnership's survival, but hope despite uncertainty. That's truth revelation requires, complete documentation showing founder as he was rather than legend he might become. Awan reported from Enhanced Quarter Monitoring. Enhanced representatives are calculating the consolidation advantage. The founder's authority prevented a capability-based hierarchy through personal influence that constitutional frameworks couldn't duplicate. His death removes constraint. Enkidu will face pressure immediately. The weighted voting proposal Gilgamesh defeated will return through different mechanisms. Enhanced humans see the founder's death as an opportunity, proving that biological advantages should determine governance rather than artificial equality constraining natural hierarchy. Kaimana reported from Baseline Quarter Monitoring. Baseline populations are grieving the protector's death while recognizing that protection was never guaranteed beyond the founder's lifetime. Sharur is preparing a baseline coalition to defend equity, recognizing that defense has become harder when the defender dies. Baseline humans understand that partnership continuation depends on institutions rather than personalities, and institutions feel inadequate without personality animating them. Siduri, one of 3 hybrid order members, reported from a mediation perspective. Hybrids are exhausted. Gilgamesh called us tired and acknowledged the burden of the bridge honestly. His death means losing a rare, enhanced human who valued bridges rather than seeing bridges as an inconvenient necessity. Future mediation requires choosing a service even though the founder who made the service meaningful is gone. We're uncertain whether a partnership survives when the person who made the partnership personal has ended. Methuselah absorbed reports showing 3 populations processing the same death differently through biological and political positions that the partnership attempted to bridge without eliminating divisions, creating a necessity for a bridge. This is what revelation will judge, he said, voice carrying conviction that 15 years leading the order had strengthened rather than weakened. Not whether Gilgamesh built a perfect partnership, he didn't, and admitted it openly. Not whether institutions guaranteed equity, they can't, because biology creates pressure that institutions constrain without eliminating. But whether humans continued choosing partnership after the founder died, whether conscious choice outlived the chooser, whether inadequate structures proved adequate foundation for building better. He gestured to quantum storage containing documentation from 6,000 years of intervention, fire teaching, agricultural development, bronze metallurgy, writing systems, architectural instruction, mathematical frameworks, and astronomical knowledge. Every gift preserved. Every consequence documented. Every choice encoded to reveal whether the intervention helped or harmed. Gilgamesh represents the first generation in which partnership has been seriously tested, Methuselah continued. Enhanced humans choosing equity despite biological advantages, enabling hierarchy. Baseline humans participating rather than submitting. Hybrids bridging despite exhaustion. All three populations cooperate through conscious choice rather than biological determinism. His death asks, can the second generation make the same choice without the founder's personal authority compelling them to do so? Can institutions maintain equity when the personalities that animated institutions have died? Can a partnership survive as governance rather than just charismatic leadership? He pulled up timeline projections showing 5 trigger points approaching: political consolidation, immediate, resource wars, approaching, speciation crisis, 8 centuries hence, technology cascade, ongoing, and revelation, 12 centuries future. Each crisis tests a partnership differently. Each requires human choice transcending biological pressure. We don't know if the partnership survives, Methuselah said honestly. Don't know if Enkidu maintains what Gilgamesh built. Don't know if institutions prove sufficient when tested without a founder stabilizing them. Don't know if, 30 generations hence, humans judging the intervention will condemn or validate the choices that created the possibility of a partnership. But we know we documented honestly. Preserved complete truth showing both success and failure, both hope and doubt, both achievement and inadequacy. That's Order's covenant, not guaranteeing outcomes but enabling informed judgment, not preventing crisis but witnessing truthfully, not ensuring survival but preserving evidence that future generations require for understanding whether intervention was necessary or harmful. He began the formal documentation ceremony. Ritual Enoch had established, words spoken over every Order member whose service ended, phrases connecting individual sacrifice to eternal mission. Gilgamesh served partnership, Methuselah said, voice resonating through a quantum-stabilized chamber where sound carried weight that mere air couldn't sustain. Witness truths others overlooked, that biology doesn't determine worth, that capability doesn't justify hierarchy, that justice matters more than efficiency, that conscious choice can transcend biological determinism when consciousness understands what it's choosing. Documented reality through institutions that preserved equity principles despite biological pressure toward consolidation. Built frameworks enabling cooperation across biological divisions that the intervention created. Established precedent showing that partnership was possible even when partnership wasn't easy, sustainable even when partnership wasn't comfortable, and achievable even when partnership wasn't optimal. Prepared future generations for honesty about intervention's consequences while maintaining hope that consequences could be managed ethically rather than merely endured passively. Died admitting inadequacy honestly rather than claiming success falsely. Passed burden to successors while trusting they would build better than he could, improve what he couldn't perfect, maintain what he established imperfectly. He placed an encoded tablet into quantum storage, molecular bonds preserving information against time, quantum entanglement protecting against degradation, crystalline structure encoding data that would outlast civilizations. His death serves as a revelation, Methuselah continued, in ceremonial words. His testament serves both species, attempting cooperation across the intervention's legacy. His inadequate institutions serve purposes he couldn't perfect but established as a foundation for successors who might achieve what the founders couldn't. Order remembers what populations forget. Order preserves what political pressures would erase. Order ensures his death meant something beyond tragedy, meant transition point where partnership was tested, where populations chose continuation or collapse, where inadequacy proved sufficient or insufficient for building equity across biological hierarchy immortal intervention created. The assembled Order members stood in silence, acknowledging the weight of the moment that documentation preserved. Not celebrating. Celebration would be inappropriate when the founder died, when testing approached, when outcomes remained uncertain, but witnessing with resolve that the covenant demanded, regardless of personal cost. Founder dead. Institutions tested. Populations choosing. Order documenting everything so the revelation judgment could be informed rather than speculative, honest rather than comfortable, complete rather than selective. That was a covenant. That was the purpose. That was a mission outlasting any individual member's service. Methuselah looked at the assembled Order, 23 members ranging from enhanced teenagers to baseline elders, from first-generation enhanced to seventh-generation descendant lines, from hybrids uncertain of belonging to those who'd found purpose serving both populations through documentation transcending either. Gilgamesh never knew Order documented his leadership, Methuselah said quietly, personal reflection following ceremonial formality. Never knew that truth he protected through partnership would be preserved beyond partnership's potential collapse. Never knew that someone would remember, honestly, when political forces might prefer comfortable lies. Father built the order believing that revelation required truth surviving political convenience. Gilgamesh built a partnership, believing that equity required conscious choice, surviving biological pressure. Both were built for purposes outlasting their lives. Both died, hoping institutions they established would prove sufficient for missions they couldn't complete personally. Now we serve both missions. Preserve the truth that the partnership protected. Document choices that the revelation will judge. Maintain covenant connecting past intervention to future judgment through present documentation that neither past nor future can access, but both depend upon for honesty that complete understanding requires. He sealed the final documentation, quantum encryption ensuring preservation until the revelation timeline, when the Order's archives would be opened, the documentation would be revealed, and truth would be shared with populations ready to judge intervention honestly rather than through the partial understanding that hiding had required. Methuselah's personal reflection. Before dawn, alone. Methuselah remained in the chamber after others departed, standing before the quantum storage containing Gilgamesh's final documentation. Enhanced cognitive processing implications across timescales that the Founder's mortal lifespan couldn't access, while the Order's institutional memory was preserved across generations. Immediate, Enkidu would struggle. Consolidation would accelerate. Partnership would be tested within weeks rather than months, and days rather than weeks, if enhanced factions moved quickly to exploit the Founder's death as an opportunity for constitutional revision. Medium, constitutional amendment proposals within months, weighted voting returning through different mechanisms, economic segregation emerging through resource control, military consolidation accelerating through capability-based hierarchy that battlefield proved despite partnership's ethical objections. Each crisis-tested institutions Gilgamesh built as stopgaps rather than solutions, frameworks that enabled improvement without guaranteeing it would occur. Long-term, revelation is approaching through cumulative interventions that can't be hidden indefinitely. 5 more trigger points testing whether the partnership survived each crisis: resource wars when copper depleted, speciation crisis when enhanced baseline reproduction failed, technology cascades when iron spread uncontrollably, political fractures when populations diverged biologically, and a revelation moment when truth could no longer be hidden. 1,200 years until the revelation timeline Enoch had calculated based on human technological development, enabling the detection of quantum signatures, genetic analysis revealing the enhancement's artificial origins, and astronomical mathematics decoding Enochian text design for future comprehension. 30 generations of humans choosing partnership or hierarchy before Judgment Day arrived, when populations ready for truth would assess whether intervention succeeded or failed, whether enhancement helped or harmed, whether hiding was protective or patronizing. And underlying everything, did Gilgamesh succeed? Did inadequate institutions provide a sufficient foundation? Did conscious choice outlive the chooser? Could the second generation maintain what the first generation built when the second generation didn't experience a crisis that made the first generation recognize the necessity of a partnership? Unknown. Unknowable until tested. That uncertainty was honest rather than comfortable, realistic rather than optimistic, sufficient rather than satisfying. His father had built orders serving purposes that Methuselah inherited without choosing to preserve truth for revelation, manage premature exposures, prepare both species for honesty about intervention's origins and consequences, and bridge present hiding to future honesty through documentation that political forces couldn't corrupt because political forces didn't know documentation existed. Covenant demanding sacrifice, Kata killed serving a documentation mission, 36 others died across a century of service, Methuselah himself dedicating his life to purposes that wouldn't be fulfilled during his lifetime or his children's lifetimes or their children's lifetimes. 300 years minimum until revelation readiness emerged. Probably longer, given how humans resisted uncomfortable truths even when capable of processing them intellectually. Covenant requiring secrecy, operating from shadows, hiding from immortals who might object to documenting the mission, concealing from humans who might demand intervention, preventing crises that the Order witnessed without preventing. Living double lives where public roles mass private service to Covenant most people wouldn't understand. Covenant asking lifetimes dedicated to the future that servants wouldn't witness personally. That was the most challenging part, serving purposes beyond personal benefit, maintaining mission despite seeing rewards, preserving truth for judgment that would occur generations after preservers died. Kadak had died serving the Covenant, killed in a massacre. The Order couldn't prevent it without revealing its existence, sacrificing life to preserve documentation that the massacre revealed enhanced military dominance. The partnership's ethical frameworks couldn't constrain it. His death served as a revelation by providing evidence that biological inequality created a practical hierarchy despite constitutional equality claiming otherwise. Now Gilgamesh had died, not an Order member but a leader whose partnership enabled the Order's mission, whose institutions provided a framework where revelation could occur responsibly rather than catastrophically, whose inadequate structures offered a foundation for building better if successors chose improvement over abandonment. Both deaths served as a revelation. Both sacrifices meant something beyond personal loss. Both were documented to assess whether the intervention succeeded or failed, whether the partnership was sustainable or temporary, and whether conscious choice could transcend the biological determinism the intervention created through enhancement, which saved humanity from extinction, while creating inequality that threatened the partnership's survival. Did we do right, Father? Methuselah asked for darkness and silence in memory of Enoch, who built an organization requiring an inheritor to lead without the founder's wisdom guiding directly. No answer came from quantum-stabilized silence. Father was dead 15 years, long enough that grief had transformed from acute wound to chronic ache, from daily devastation to persistent recognition that some absences never filled. Gilgamesh was dead tonight, fresh grief mixing with old loss, new absence joining accumulated missing, recent founder's death connecting to Order founder's death through shared mission outlasting both. Founders died while missions continued. Personalities ended while institutions persisted. Individuals ceased while purposes they served transcended personal mortality through organizational structures that carried missions forward across generational succession. That was the Covenant's nature, outlasting individuals through institutional preservation that personalities animated but couldn't sustain alone, missions continuing beyond founders through servants who inherited purposes without inheriting founders' wisdom for navigating complications that inheritance didn't adequately prepare them to address. The Order existed precisely in moments when the founders died, when personal authority ended, when charismatic leadership could no longer stabilize institutions. When populations chose whether to maintain inadequate structures or abandon equity for efficiency, biology enabled and capability justified through optimization logic that felt right to enhance humans benefiting from optimization. This moment. Now. Tonight. The partnership's founder is dead. Successor uncertain. Populations are dividing along biological lines that the partnership attempted to bridge without eliminating biological reality, necessitating division. Crisis approaching faster than Gilgamesh had feared, sooner than Enkidu was prepared to face, harder than institutions were designed to withstand. Order witnessed. Order documented. Order preserved truth for revelation to judge whether intervention helped or harmed, whether enhancement saved or doomed, whether hiding was protective secrecy serving species welfare or patronizing concealment denying humans agency to determine their own development, understanding development's full context. Methuselah began encoding personal reflection, not official documentation requiring ceremony, but private thoughts that a complete record required for honesty that sanitized accounts couldn't provide, subjective assessment complementing objective reporting through emotional dimension that pure data couldn't capture. Gilgamesh died, hoping inadequate institutions were a sufficient foundation for building better. He was right that institutions were inadequate, admitted it openly, taught successors about inadequacy honestly, passed the burden without pretending the burden was lighter than reality proved. The question is whether inadequacy prevents improvement or enables it, whether admitting insufficiency invites collapse by undermining confidence, or enables honest assessment allowing repair through recognizing problems that denial would perpetuate. I don't know if a partnership survives a founder's death. Don't know if Enkidu maintains what Gilgamesh built, despite questioning whether the building was worthwhile. Don't know if populations choose continuation over consolidation when continuation requires effort, while consolidation follows biological pressure requiring less resistance. Don't know if, 30 generations hence, revelation judgment condemns or validates the intervention that created the partnership possibility, requiring continuous conscious choice rather than providing the biological certainty that hierarchy would have offered. But I know we documented honestly. preserved complete truth, including Gilgamesh's doubts alongside his hopes, his failures alongside his achievements, his inadequacy alongside his determination. Enabled informed judgment rather than comfortable fiction about the heroic founder whose genius guaranteed the partnership's survival. That's Order's purpose, not preventing crisis, not ensuring survival, not guaranteeing outcomes that human choice determines regardless of documentation's completeness. Just witnessing truthfully so future generations understand the past entirely when judging whether intervention was a tragedy or a foundation, whether enhancement saved or doomed, whether the founder's hopes were justified or merely optimistic. Gilgamesh served that purpose by building inadequate institutions while honestly admitting their inadequacy. Order serves that purpose by documenting inadequacy, complete with evidence showing what worked, what failed, what helped, and what harmed. Both serve revelation. Both serve species attempting cooperation across biology, suggesting separation. Both offer hope without guaranteeing its fulfillment, because fulfillment depends on choices that documentation preserves but doesn't determine. That uncertainty is honest. Is sufficient. This is what covenant requires when serving purposes outlasting servants' lives, when documenting for audiences not yet born, when preserving truth for judgments that the current generation won't render because judgment requires a historical perspective that only temporal distance provides adequately. 30 generations. 1,200 years. Countless choices determining whether the partnership survives or collapses, whether institutions improve or deteriorate, whether hope proves justified or optimistic. We'll document everything. Preserve all evidence. Enable a complete understanding when revelation finally occurs, so truth can be shared without the catastrophic consequences that a premature exposure might produce. That's a covenant. That's service. That's the mission that Father built, Gilgamesh enabled, I now lead. Future Order members will inherit when the current generation dies, having served purposes we believe necessary, but can't guarantee sufficient. Honest uncertainty serving eternal truth for temporal beings attempting cooperation, transcending biological determinism through conscious choice that each generation must renew because partnership is a decision rather than destiny, achievement rather than inheritance, maintenance rather than assumption. He sealed reflection into preservation storage, private thoughts joining public documentation in an eternal archive that revelation would eventually access when populations are ready for truth, requiring complete evidence enabling informed judgment about the intervention that shaped their entire civilization's development. Outside the Order chamber, Uruk grieved the founder's death, while political forces gathered to test whether institutions would outlive the founder's authority. Enhanced factions calculating consolidation advantage. Baseline populations mourning protector while recognizing protection was never guaranteed beyond the founder's lifetime. Hybrid communities exhausted from the burden of the bridge that death made heavier without alleviating necessity. Inside the Order chamber, documentation continued. Witnesses preserved the truth. Covenant servants maintained the mission that Enoch had founded, Gilgamesh had enabled through partnership, creating a framework where order could operate. Methuselah now led with a burden weighing heavier tonight than any moment since inheriting leadership 15 years prior, and future Order members would inherit when the current generation's service ended through death rather than retirement because Covenant demanded lifetimes rather than temporary commitment. The founder's death marked a transition point. Partnership tested without a stabilizing authority. Institutions strained without a personal charisma animating the framework. Populations choose whether to cooperate consciously or follow a biological hierarchy when a choice requires effort, avoiding the effort by eliminating the choice through accepting the efficiency that the capability enables naturally. Order witnessed everything. Even, especially, the moments when outcomes remained uncertain, when hope confronted doubt, when conscious choice determined whether biology became destiny or challenge that consciousness could transcend through decisions that mathematics couldn't predict, that probability couldn't determine, that documentation would preserve for judgment that future would render about past that present was living without knowing how history would evaluate choices made under pressure that made optimal decisions impossible while requiring decisions nonetheless. Gilgamesh was dead. The partnership's founder had passed. The builder of inadequate institutions had died, hoping inadequacy was a sufficient foundation for successors to build better. Partnership continued, imperfectly, uncertainly, necessarily. Tested immediately without a grace period and strained without a stabilizing presence. Chosen consciously or abandoned efficiently based on the population's decisions that no authority could mandate, no institution could guarantee, and no founder could determine beyond death. Order documented both death and continuation, both ending and testing, both founders passing and institution's survival attempt, both hope maintained and doubt acknowledged. Truth preserved completely. Revelation was prepared comprehensively. Covenant was maintained faithfully despite the cost that service demanded, the sacrifice that documentation required, and the uncertainty that honest witnessing produced when comfortable conclusions weren't justified by the evidence that reality provided. That was sufficient. Barely. Painfully. Necessarily. But sufficient nonetheless for purposes that transcended sufficiency's comfort, for missions that outlasted personal satisfaction, for service that asked everything while guaranteeing nothing except preservation of truth that future judgment required, for honesty that neither past hiding nor present politics could provide adequately without documentation, that order maintained across generations, serving covenant connecting intervention to revelation through evidence that complete understanding demanded. The body was still warm when politics began. Enkidu stood beside the deathbed, holding the ring of office that felt too heavy for his finger despite the bronze's modest weight. Successor designated by the dying founder. Enhanced human with cognitive advantages that made leadership seem natural. 45-year-old administrator who'd questioned the partnership's value while serving in the partnership government. Should he accept succession? Refuse it? Demand constitutional revision before assuming authority? Ishara approached via enhanced delegation, moving with confidence, cognition enhanced through rapid social calculation. The council should meet immediately, she said, voice carrying authority despite lacking an official position. Succession requires confirmation. Partnership needs stability. Delay breeds uncertainty. Delay also breeds deliberation, Sharur countered, baseline elder inserting himself into a conversation that enhanced humans might have preferred conducting exclusively. Founder's body isn't cold yet. Can't we mourn before politicking? Mourning and governing aren't mutually exclusive. Ishara's tone remained respectful but firm. Gilgamesh would want continuity. Would want institutions functioning despite his absence. Would want partnership maintained through transition rather than weakened by delay. Sharur's expression suggested disagreement with what Gilgamesh would want, but political wisdom prevented arguing with the dead's presumed preferences. Siduri moved between them, hybrid mediator positioning herself physically where her role placed her psychologically. Both are right, she said quietly. Mourning matters. Continuity matters. Can't ignore either. The question is how to honor both simultaneously. Confirmation vote tomorrow, Enkidu said, voice lacking conviction but carrying decision. Tonight, mourning. Tomorrow, governance. After, whatever crisis emerges from testing whether the successor can maintain what the founder built. The enhanced delegation nodded, decision made, efficiency achieved, uncertainty minimized. The baseline representatives nodded less enthusiastically, rushed timeline, inadequate mourning, politics intruding on grief. The hybrid mediators nodded with relief, compromise reached, populations included, immediate fracture prevented. But a compromise that satisfied no one completely was the norm for the partnership. Gilgamesh had said that repeatedly. Had warned that equity felt like inadequacy to everyone. Had predicted that just outcomes rarely satisfied fully. The immortals remained in the chamber as others departed, 9 quantum beings surrounding the body of a human they'd enhanced, educated, empowered, and ultimately watched die despite their intervention. We did this, Thalia said quietly, guilt carried for 6,000 years now amplified by Gilgamesh's death. Enhanced him. Gave him capabilities. Created inequality. He spent his life trying to manage it. Watched him struggle with the consequences of our choices. We also gave him time, Sophia said gently. Gave him knowledge. Gave him tools for building a partnership. Gave him a foundation stronger than what baseline humans could have achieved alone. Both are true, Nix said, probability calculations yielding to simple acknowledgement. We helped and harmed. Saved and endangered. Created tools and burdens. Enhanced and cursed. That's intervention's nature, both/and rather than either/or. Chronos stood silent, organization immortal, confronting reality that efficiency hadn't prevented this crisis, optimization hadn't solved institutional inadequacy, capability hadn't guaranteed partnership survival. 50,000 years of building systems. 6,000 years of hiding. 50 years of partnership testing. One founder's death tested whether organizational structures outlived architects. He'd been wrong. Not entirely wrong. Efficiency did matter, optimization did help, capability did enable governance. But wrong about efficiency mattering more than justice. Wrong about optimization justifying inequality. Wrong about capability determining worth. We need to support the successor, Chronos said, voice carrying unfamiliar uncertainty. Need to help Enkidu navigate the crisis we helped create. Need to use our experience for stabilizing rather than controlling. Erebus made a slight sound that might have been agreement or merely an acknowledgement that Chronos had finally recognized what Erebus had argued for millennia. Supporting means knowing when to step back, Erebus said. Means letting humans choose even when we fear their choices. Means accepting that partnership survival depends on human will rather than immortal guidance. Prometheus moved to the window, looking out at Uruk's lights scattered across the darkness. A city built by human and immortal collaboration, enhanced in baseline cooperation, a partnership that created civilization despite biology suggesting separation. We taught them fire, he said quietly. Now we watch whether they use it for warmth or burning. 3 days later, Uruk gathered to witness Gilgamesh's funeral. This ceremony demonstrated the partnership's survival through the founder's absence, even as it tested whether survival meant continuation or merely temporary stability. The funeral procession moved through city streets in a configuration that symbolized the partnership structure, enhanced humans in front by their biological ability to move efficiently, baseline humans following by choice rather than inferior position, hybrid mediators distributed throughout, connecting populations, immortals interspersed among humans rather than separate from them. Gilgamesh's body rested on a ceremonial platform carried by 8 bearers, 4 enhanced, 4 baseline, explicitly selected to demonstrate equity through shared burden. Physical weight distributed according to capability, enhanced humans bore slightly more, but symbolic weight shared equally, all 8 carried the partnership's founder together. That accommodation, acknowledging biological difference while maintaining political equality, represented partnership in microcosm. Neither denying reality nor accepting reality as destiny. Building equity within inequality rather than pretending inequality didn't exist. Uruk's streets were filled with mourners, a population drawn together by grief rather than by a governance mandate. Enhanced humans who'd respected Gilgamesh's leadership despite questioning the partnership's constraints. Baseline humans who'd trusted Gilgamesh's protection despite recognizing his advantages. Hybrids who'd seen Gilgamesh as a rare example of enhanced human valuing bridges over domination. The procession reached the burial site outside Uruk's walls, a location deliberately chosen to symbolize partnership extending beyond the city's physical boundaries. Gilgamesh would be buried in an earth accessible to all populations rather than secured within an enhanced quarters-protected zone. Enkidu stood beside the grave, holding the ring of office confirmed by the council vote the previous day. Confirmation had passed 87 to 76 margin, suggesting division rather than unity, acceptance rather than enthusiasm, continuation rather than endorsement. Gilgamesh would have noted that a close vote demonstrated partnership's health. A consensus that demanded no dissent was tyranny, not democracy. Gilgamesh built inadequate institutions, Enkidu said, in a funeral speech acknowledging reality rather than offering false comfort. Built protections are insufficient for preventing consolidation. Built frameworks that hold under pressure without eliminating pressure. Built foundation for partnership without guaranteeing partnership survival. Enhanced representatives shifted uncomfortably. Was that the successor's tribute to the founder? Acknowledging inadequacy instead of celebrating achievement? But inadequacy doesn't mean failure, Enkidu continued, voice growing stronger with recognition. Means honest building. Means human limitation is acknowledged. Means founder who knew he couldn't solve everything but built something anyway, hoping successors would improve what he couldn't perfect. He looked at assembled populations enhanced, baseline, hybrid, immortal gathered through choice despite biology suggesting separation. Gilgamesh died hoping institutions were sufficient, Enkidu said. Died knowing he couldn't guarantee sufficiency. Died trusting humans would choose to maintain a partnership despite the easier alternative of a capability-based hierarchy. That trust, that hope without certainty is a legacy we inherit. He paused, processing emotions that enhanced cognition couldn't eliminate, even as he calculated the optimal funeral oration. I don't know if I believe in partnership, Enkidu said, honesty replacing political calculation. Don't know if equity is worth the cost. Don't know if institutions are strong enough to survive biology's pressure. Don't know if Gilgamesh's hope proves justified or merely optimistic. But I know he built a foundation. Now he is past the burden. Now he died trusting us to choose. Enkidu held up the ring of office, a bronze circle inscribed with partnership symbols, worn by Gilgamesh for 50 years, now transferred to an uncertain successor. I accept this burden, Enkidu said. Accept authority. Accept responsibility. Accept institutions, I question, while serving in government, they create. That acceptance doesn't mean certainty. Means commitment to testing whether the partnership survives the founder's death. Means willingness to maintain inadequate institutions while working to improve them. Means choosing hope despite doubts, because hope is what founders offer when certainty proves impossible. The body was lowered into the earth. Soil covered Gilgamesh's remains, an enhanced human who'd lived 172 years returning to ground that sustained all humans regardless of biological advantages. Death is an equalizer that delays but can't prevent it. Mortality is a reminder that even enhanced humans are temporary despite extended lifespans. Mourners filed past the grave, each population showing grief according to their traditions, enhanced humans offering formal respect, baseline humans weeping openly, hybrids displaying emotion somewhere between the two, immortals standing silent, as ancient beings confronting mortality they'd never experienced personally but had witnessed constantly among humans they'd enhanced. Himalayan Archive. 1 week later, Thalia stood in the archive's medical section, surrounded by 6,000 years of research documenting the development, refinement, and consequences of enhancement. Gilgamesh's death had sent her here, seeking understanding or absolution or merely escape from the guilt that followed her everywhere. Genetic modification she'd designed. Cellular repair mechanisms she'd created. Enhanced cognition she'd enabled. Biological advantages she'd granted. And now, enhanced humans using those advantages to consolidate power, questioning the value of partnership, pushing toward a hierarchy where capability is justified through optimization logic. Had she doomed humanity through helping it? Saved civilization through endangering justice? Created tools that serve both equity and tyranny, depending on who wielded them? Nyx materialized beside her, quantum presence taking physical form in the archive's quantum-stabilized environment. You're not responsible for their choices, Nyx said gently. I'm responsible for giving them capabilities that make certain choices possible, Thalia countered. For creating biological inequality that generates political pressure. For enhancing humans without understanding the full consequences. We couldn't have understood the consequences. Nyx pulled up probability calculations showing timeline branches. Refugee crisis allowed no perfect choices. Hiding seemed right. Enhancement seemed necessary. Revelation seemed premature until it suddenly became overdue. We made the best decisions possible with the information available. That those decisions created new problems doesn't mean original decisions were wrong. Thalia gestured to medical records filling the archive's quantum storage, 47 failed baseline life extension experiments, hybrid sterility data, enhanced longevity statistics, population health measurements spanning 6 millennia. I created permanent inequality, she said. Created a biological hierarchy that institutions can't eliminate. Created advantages that enhanced humans use for consolidation despite the partnership's protections. Gilgamesh spent 50 years managing the consequences of my choices. Died hoping inadequate institutions would survive despite the pressure I helped generate. And now I watch humans I enhanced question why they should share power with humans I didn't enhance as thoroughly. You also gave them time, Nyx said. Gave them knowledge. Gave them the capabilities to survive challenges that baseline humans couldn't have overcome. Gave them a foundation for building a partnership despite biology suggesting hierarchy. Did I? Thalia's voice carried decades of doubt compressed into a question. Or did I just delay inevitable consolidation? Create temporary equity that disguised permanent inequality? Build a partnership that functions only when the founders with authority hold it together. She pulled up Gilgamesh's medical scans. 172 years of enhanced physiology were documented in detail, with death recorded as systematically as life had been monitored. He lived longer than baseline humans, Thalia said. had advantages I designed, used capabilities I granted, and died, hoping institutions were sufficient despite recognizing inadequacy. That hope, that uncertainty is my legacy. Enhanced humans are questioning whether justice matters more than capability. Baseline humans trusting institutions I helped build despite the inequality I created. Hybrids struggling with fertility issues, my genetic modifications caused unintentionally. Both/and, Nyx said simply. You helped and harmed. Saved and endangered. Created tools and burdens. Enhanced and cursed. That's the nature of an intervention. That's the reality of refugee choices. That's what we live with, having harmed helping, created danger through saving, generated inequality through protecting. Thalia looked at calculations showing the consolidation probability increasing over the next 15 years, an 87% chance that enhanced humans would dominate politically unless something changed the trajectory. Partnership holding but straining. Institutions are inadequate but functioning. Future uncertain, but still containing the possibility that equity survived despite biology's pressure. Gilgamesh built inadequate institutions and died hoping they were sufficient, Thalia said. I created biological inequality and hope humans choose equity despite capabilities suggesting hierarchy. Both of us passed burdens without guarantees. Both of us trusted humans to use our gifts well despite uncertainty. Both of us died or will die not knowing whether hope proved justified. She turned to Nyx, an ancient friend who'd calculated probabilities for 50,000 years without achieving certainty about future outcomes. Is that enough? Thalia asked. Building inadequately, passing the burden, hoping the successor improves what we couldn't perfect? Is that a sufficient foundation? Or merely optimistic failure? I don't know, Nyx admitted. Probability can't predict human choice. Mathematics describes possibilities without determining outcomes. But I know Gilgamesh built something. No institutions function despite inadequacy. Humans gathered at his deathbed through choice despite biology suggesting separation. That gathering, that continuous conscious choice to be present despite differences suggests partnership has a foundation beyond the founder's authority. Suggests, Thalia repeated. Not guarantees. Not ensures. Suggests. That's all we have, suggestions, hopes, insufficient institutions, and trust that humans choose well despite our intervention creating pressure toward choosing poorly. She returned to medical records, documentation of enhancement's development and consequences, filling quantum storage with both achievement and warning. Gilgamesh died with a six-domain crisis unresolved, Thalia said. Political consolidation approaching. Economic dominance is entrenched. Military hierarchy established. Infrastructure segregation built. Biological inequality is permanent. Resource scarcity is emerging. Partnership holding but strained. Institutions are inadequate but functioning. Future uncertain but possible. She pulled up succession data, and Kidu confirmed as new leader, an enhanced human who questioned the partnerships taking authority in the partnership government, a capable administrator who doubted equity's value, now responsible for maintaining equity's institutions. That uncertainty, that testing, is what survives the founder's death, Thalia said. Not certainty. Not solutions. Not guarantees. Just institutions are inadequate for preventing a crisis but sufficient for navigating it. Just hope without certainty. Just trust that humans choose equity despite biology suggesting hierarchy. She looked at Nyx, probably an immortal whose calculations couldn't predict whether the partnership survived the generation testing it. Is that legacy enough? Thalia asked. Tools without guarantees? Foundation without certainty? Hope that successors improve what founders couldn't perfect. It's what we have, Nyx said simply. What refugees can offer. What intervention produces. What humanity inherits are capabilities and challenges together, tools and burdens simultaneously, a foundation for building better or building tyranny, depending on the choices humans make. Thalia nodded slowly, accepting the reality that acceptance couldn't change. Enhancement created inequality, inequality generated pressure, pressure tested institutions, institutions held or failed based on human choice rather than an immortal guarantee. Gilgamesh had built inadequate institutions and died, hoping they were sufficient. Thalia had created biological inequality and hoped humans would choose equity despite the advantages suggesting hierarchy. Both had passed burdens without guarantees. Both had trusted humans to use their gifts well despite uncertainty about outcomes. Both had died or would die not knowing whether hope proved justified or merely optimistic. That was the founders' and teachers' shared fate, building, passing the burden, hoping the successor would complete what they couldn't finish. The only question remaining, would hope prove sufficient despite institutional inadequacy? Time would answer. Human choice would determine. Biology would pressure. Institutions would hold or fail. Partnership would survive or collapse. Gilgamesh had died without knowing. The immortals who'd created this crisis through well-intentioned intervention lived without knowing. The enhanced humans questioning partnership's value, baseline humans trusting institutional protections, and hybrid mediators bridging populations would decide. That decision, that continuous conscious choice, would reveal whether founders' hope proved sufficient despite inadequacy, or merely postponed inevitable consolidation that biology made possible and capability justified through optimization logic. Gilgamesh dies peacefully. Partnership loses its foundation. Survival probability, 19%. Catastrophic. Declining without a stabilizing presence. Constitutional frameworks are urgently needed because personal authority is insufficient when the founders die. But Gilgamesh chose Sharur carefully, an enhanced warrior who learned equity through the founders' teaching. Successor understands biology's pressure while consciously choosing a partnership. Immortals learn through grief. Chronos begins questioning efficiency. Prometheus recognizes that gifts create dependencies. Even Erebus admits non-intervention might have caused extinction. Pattern beginning, founders die, successors inherit, frameworks must replace charisma. In Chapter 13, the consolidation attempt, 6 years after Gilgamesh's death, enhanced representatives propose capability-based governance. Logic versus democracy. Efficiency versus equity. Partnership fragmenting. Join us next time.